they're dark, man. Like
There, yes,
they're
yes.
so dark. Like you're feeling like your core wounds in these spaces. And the first time I had I did a mushroom ceremony, I had a very traumatizing experience. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't have an integration period afterwards. There was just so much information that was missing for me. And I think this is the
Yeah.
thing when you take like indigenous traditions and bring them to the West, or as someone that grows up in the West experiencing these like native traditions that are foreign to where you come from, you miss like all of the integration that comes after it, or the wisdom that comes along with that culture.
Wow. Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up. Because we have to understand that these medicines, the guardians of this medicine have been the indigenous, and the
Mm-hmm.
indigenous have a very, very different life than us,
Mm-hmm.
culturally, emotionally, like everything, is still tribal way of living. So they grew up within a community and everything's healed within the community. Things are corrected within the community.
Mm-hmm.
And something that nobody really seems to be talking about. I mean, there are some groups that actually do talk about it, and I'll like Spirit School and the Intheon Nation, they do talk about this. The indigenous communities are also traumatized because of all of the shit that happened with the invasions. So that trauma is still very much alive in the culture. And
Mm-hmm.
even with all of that, so they're dealing with their own crap and they're guarding this medicine and they're taking this medicine, and their understanding of it is based on their life in the jungles.
Mm-hmm.
It's based on their life in nature. We have been so disconnected from nature for so long that, like, for us, what is a snake? Oh, well, we know now what a snake means, but for them it has a deeper meaning because they're so immersed in this space. And now we have the complexity of the Western mind. We have
Mm-hmm.
the isolation, we have all the social norms, we have, this is like a post-Renaissance period of the intellectualized human, and concepts and philosophy. Like there's so much more complexities in our life. So now you're going to put a mind that has been conditioned and programmed by Western culture and by the history that entails, and give it this medicine that is just absolutely wild, and then be like, here's the medicine. And the indigenous, they're doing their thing. They're like, oh, this is how we do it with our people. Drink the medicine, and then, vaya
Yeah.
con Dios, like go with God, and then heal yourself. But what we don't understand is that we have very fragile minds.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have that endurance of living in the jungle, where that forms a different type of like resilience and relationship with earth, where they don't over romanticize nature. They're like, nature will kill you, so you have to respect her. And we're like, no, I want to be in nature because I want to come
Yeah.
back to my mother. And
Yes.
so that's like that polarity of their respect for nature, because they know Mother Earth gives us, but she can also kill us very easily. And then
Mm-hmm.
our over romanticization of that with our super disconnected Western mind, we are not equipped to just take the medicine and then go on with our lives. We need support. And I think that
Yes.
this renaissance of plant medicine that's happening, and a lot of non-indigenous shamans learning the traditions, it's actually very beautiful. We have to make sure that we're honoring the tradition, honoring the indigenous, protecting them,
Mm-hmm.
giving back as much as we can, because they're giving us this medicine. And I'm done with the whole, oh, let me just take from you and then let's go
Yeah.
give it to the West. Like, we have to
Mm-hmm.
create a different relationship. But I think that it's very wise that now there is, non-indigenous shamans coming, because they're trained from the indigenous, but then they have that Western
Exactly.
understanding of our mind.
Yeah, like there's this Western model of like knowing that we in the West need like potentially psychotherapists present. We need
Exactly.
people to facilitate our integration. There's going to be shit that comes up that we don't know how to deal with, and we're not in that indigenous environment anymore, or we don't have access, like 100% access to shamans or medicine men or medicine women to support us in this journey. And I think this is such a crucial piece that's missing, I find, within this kind of explosive space of medicine. Is
Mm-hmm.
we think we can, as you said, we think we can take or like adopt these healing modalities from indigenous cultures, but we don't think about what is necessary after we take the medicine. Um,
Mhm.
and it can
Yeah.
result in like I know for me, like after I did the mushroom ceremony, and it was intense, and it was a friend of mine that ran the ceremony. She's Mexican and she's very familiar with this medicine.
Mhm.
Um, but she'd gone back to Mexico after this, and I felt like I'd lost my mind in the ceremony. Like it deconstructed my ego to a level that was extremely uncomfortable for me. Like in that space, I became everything, you know,
Yeah.
I became everything. And when you become everything, it's like, wow, how beautiful. I am one with all.
Mm-mm.
But when you become one with all, you become nothing
Yeah.
simultaneously. And to lose the ego, to lose your persona, and to become everything, you have to feel what it is to be absolutely nothing.
Exactly. And also, what does it feel like to be everything? Because to be everything is not just to be love and light and joy,
Mhm.
it's to be pain, it's to experience the most atrocious emotions that we feel as human beings, is to
Totally.
feel the collective pain of slavery, the
Mhm.
collective pain of trauma, of abuse, of like
Mhm.
torture, everything. That's
Mhm.
everything.
That is
Plus
everything.
the good stuff all at
Yeah.
once.
Yeah, it's like I like drifted down into my own personal hell. Like it was extremely confronting because I knew that that space was me. And it was
Mhm.
like being confronted by these deep, deep, deep shadows. And then once you become nothing and once you become everything, it's like, who the fuck am I? Like
Yeah.
I don't know who I am. And I think that triggered something so it was really like a very cathartic moment. And I think I regretted that ceremony for maybe a year and a half because it
Yeah.
just, you know, like I didn't have any support after that. Like I didn't have anyone to talk to. Because also when you go through an experience like this, like you can't just like call up your BFF and be like, oh my God, you won't believe what I went through, you know, like unless your
Yeah.
BFF is also in that space, of course. But yeah, it can, I guess, like, I guess I also want to like talk about the realistic impacts of going through this healing work of clearing trauma, of exposing yourself to your own demons, of confronting your own shadow space is going to make you question your identity, question your
Mhm.
existence, question your sense of belonging and why we're here on the planet. And I mean,
Mhm.
these questions are so important, but I think there is always the risk of getting lost in the like confusion of it all. And I think that's the space I was in for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah. I've had a few friends that have told me like I thought I was going crazy and I'm never in my life touching medicine again. It's
Mm,
just never happening. And I can see it's so important because the medicine is it's a feminine force. So
mhm,
it's like it opens you up to feel it all because that's what the healing is. And she, as the grandmother, receives it all. And because of that, because you have just this feminine flow of energy, you need a container. You need containment that needs to be
mm,
held by very grounded individuals that know how to like maintain, how to not get lost in fear, how to not get lost in judgment, how to be able to observe what's happening inside the container and not let their own triggers intervene with the space holding. So that's why
mhm,
the indigenous are so good at this because you see them and there's somebody like screaming or crying, or there's somebody doing animal noises and they're like they're just like seeing it all, like I'm good, I'm here, I'm grounded.
mhm,
And that's just the ceremony piece. And like you say, that's like the tip of the iceberg. Everything else that opens up in ceremony needs to be addressed. And there's so much symbolism and there's so much richness in mysticism. I
mhm,
actually had an extremely, I mean, I've been drinking medicine for years, but I had a very traumatizing experience about a year ago. I was drinking medicine back in Colombia, and Colombian medicine is a little bit stronger, in my opinion.
mhm,
And I just lost, and I felt the everything of the feminine polarity of like Lilith and Kali and just that like
Mm-hmm.
uncaged feminine essence. And there were like five men trying to hold me down, and I was like, the
Wow.
more they were trying to hold me down, the more I was like, just like screaming, and I could feel the moon, the energy of the moon, like pulling all of this out. And it was extremely traumatizing because I have the understanding of the energies of Lilith, of Kali, because I've learned from other cultures as well. I've learned from, you know, tantric philosophies, I've learned from Celtic philosophies. So
Mm.
they have different archetypes that I've
Mm-hmm.
learned from. So they are alive in my mind. And there's a part of my psyche that has connected to that. So in this release of energy, of that fiery feminine energy, the indigenous were like, well, she's possessed. What other explanation do we have for this? And they're like, oh, somebody's definitely doing witchcraft on you. And I'm like, oh my
Wow.
God, you have got to be kidding me. And in that space, I'm already so scared. I'm hearing this. And there was this one assistant that was just like, hey, hermana, like sister, remember love. And I'm like, oh, that one, that's the one I want to listen to.
Mm-hmm.
Remember love. And in that whole process, I was able to learn to hold space for me in the wilderness, in the complete dissolution of Silvana and the embodiment of all of the feminine fire, all the feminine repression expressed at once. And after that process, integration was actually extremely quickly. And
Mm-hmm.
it was because there was this woman in that place that she came up to me and she said, she looked at me in the eye and she said, I know where you were at. I know where you were feeling. Thank you.
Wow.
And when she said that to me, I felt that she had been in the same place that I was that night before.
Mm-hmm.
And the embodiment, the presence of this woman, her love, her compassion, her non-judgment, because everybody was looking at me like I was crazy. Like people will make eye contact with me and look away, like because it
Oh.
was crazy. And this woman just said that. And in that moment, I integrated it. As crazy as that sounds, in that moment, I'm like, wow, I understand. Like out of nowhere, the energy got organized. And then I'm like, oh my God, I am like a wolf. Like I am the servant of the moon. I am the one that's going to hold space for the woman from now on.
Mm-hmm.
And it was because she had that understanding by being there. And I also had wisdom, Celtic wisdom, Hindu wisdom, that was guiding me back to understand a different side of the feminine that maybe doesn't really, it's not really allowed in the indigenous culture.
Yeah.
Because in the indigenous culture, they're like, women tend to be very reserved and quiet, and there's, it's like more like the, what is that called, like the virgin maiden
Mm-hmm.
soft feminine archetype,
Mm-hmm.
just like the gentle woman. Like very rarely you see an indigenous woman losing her shit. I'm sure
Mm-hmm.
it has happened. But
Yeah.
it's just not socially there. So they weren't able to hold space for me. Even if I had the shaman, they'll
Mm-hmm.
be like, well, you must have something in you because that's not normal. And now from this place, I'm like, actually, that is completely normal.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's exactly what needed to happen.
I can see why that would be so re-traumatizing as well, because like when you go into these spaces, when you go into these healing spaces, it's like you're uncovering your shadows. And it's crazy to think for that shadow to come up and be
Mm-hmm.
shamed, judged,
Yes.
rejected. That's like further validating the idea that you have to reject yourself or remain fragmented, you know?
Exactly.
And
And
so,
that's the invitation. That's the medicine.
mhm,
That's why I went there. That's why this whole thing happened. If
mhm.
everybody, the whole world around you rejects you, even the healers, are you
Yes.
going to still reject yourself, or do you choose to
Oof.
accept yourself? That was the healing.
That's a really intense space to be in. And I think these kinds of spaces aren't spoken about, because I think like we assume that when we come into spaces like this, we're always going to be validated, we're always going to be accepted. But the truth is, like in spaces of even the most spiritual of spaces have all of
Mm-hmm.
this judgment. Spirituality also has its shadow.